pre-dawn darkness of May 1st, 1898 hung heavy over Manila Bay like a suffocating blanket. Commodore George Dewey stood on the bridge of his flagship USS Olympia, his weathered hands gripping the rail as he peered through the gloom toward the distant Spanish fleet. Behind him, the American Asiatic Squadron cut through the calm waters in perfect formation, 6 warships, carrying the weight of a nation's ambitions and the fury of a people demanding justice for the The tension aboard the Olympia was palpable. Sailors moved with practiced efficiency, their faces grim with the knowledge that within hours they would either taste victory or meet their maker in the depths of Manila Bay. The air reeked of coal smoke and gun oil, while the rhythmic thrum of the engines created an almost hypnotic backdrop to the impending chaos. Dewey's steely blue eyes reflected decades of naval experience, but even he couldn't have predicted that this morning would reshape the balance of global power. As the first pale fingers of dawn stretched across the horizon, the silhouettes of Spanish warships began to emerge from the shadows like ghostly sentinels guarding their colonial prize. Admiral Patricio Montoyo y Pasaron had anchored his fleet in the shallow waters near Cavite Arsenal, hoping the proximity to shore batteries would provide additional protection. Reina Cristina rode at anchor alongside 6 other vessels, their crews equally tense, but fighting for an empire already showing cracks in its foundation. The Spanish had ruled these waters for over 3 centuries, their galleons once carrying untold riches from the Philippines back to the motherland. Now, as American industrial might bore down upon them, the weight of history seemed to press against their shoulders. Montoyo knew his ships were outgunned and outmanned, but Spanish honor demanded they fight with whatever strength remained. According to contemporary accounts from Harper's Weekly, the American squadron had traveled over 7,000 miles from their base in Hong Kong, a journey that tested both men and machines to their limits. The crew of the USS Olympia had spent weeks preparing for this moment, cleaning guns, checking ammunition, and drilling endlessly under Dewey's exacting standards. Every man knew that failure would mean not just personal defeat, but national humiliation on the world stage. The morning mist began to lift as the American fleet approached Boca Grande, the main entrance to Manila Bay. Spanish shore batteries at El Fraile and Caballo Islands opened fire first, their shells whistling overhead and splashing harmlessly into the bay. The range was too great, but the sound of those cannons echoing across the water served as a grim overture to the symphony of destruction that was about to unfold. Dewey raised his telescope one final time, studying the enemy formation with the calculating gaze of a predator sizing up its prey. The Spanish ships appeared smaller now, almost fragile against the backdrop of the sprawling bay. In his mind, he could already see the outcome: American naval supremacy established in a single morning's work. He lowered the telescope and turned to his flag captain, his voice carrying across the bridge with quiet authority. The stage was set for what would become one of the most decisive naval battles in American history. At exactly 5:13 in the morning, Commodore Dewey's voice cut through the humid air like a blade through silk. "You may fire when you are ready, Gridley," he commanded Captain Charles Vernon Gridley, his words destined to echo through American naval history. The USS Olympia's 8-inch guns roared to life, their thunderous reports shattering the morning calm and announcing America's arrival as a Pacific naval power. The American battle line stretched across Manila Bay in magnificent formation, USS Olympia leading, followed by USS Baltimore, USS Raleigh, USS Petrel, USS Concord, and USS Boston. Each ship bristled with modern artillery, their crews trained to a razor's edge by months of intensive preparation. The contrast with the Spanish fleet could not have been more stark. While American vessels represented the cutting edge of naval technology, our opponents relied on aging ships with outdated weaponry and undermanned crews. Admiral Montoyo watched in growing horror as American shells began finding their marks with devastating accuracy. The Spanish flagship Reina Cristina, though bearing a proud name meaning Queen Christine, proved no match for the concentrated firepower of Dewey's squadron. Her wooden hull, reinforced with iron plating that belonged to an earlier era of naval warfare, splintered, under the impact of American projectiles. Spanish sailors scrambled across blood-slicked decks, desperately trying to return fire while their ship disintegrated around them. The battle quickly devolved into a one-sided massacre. American gunnery, honed by constant practice and superior equipment, proved devastatingly effective against Spanish targets that seemed almost stationary in comparison. The USS Olympia's main batteries fired with mechanical precision, each salvo tearing great holes in enemy vessels. Smoke began to pour from Spanish ships as fires spread through their wooden superstructures, turning proud warships into floating funeral pyres. Spanish gunfire, when it came, proved largely ineffective against American steel. The few shells that found their targets either bounced harmlessly off armored hulls or caused only superficial damage. It became clear that this was not a battle between equals, but rather a demonstration of industrial might crushing colonial antiquity. The technological gap between the two fleets represented nothing less than the difference between 19th century naval power and the dawn of modern warfare. From his position on the Olympia's bridge, Dewey watched the destruction unfold with professional satisfaction. Each Spanish ship that fell silent under American guns represented another step toward complete victory. The morning sun, now fully risen, illuminated a scene of utter devastation as Spanish vessels burned and listed. In the shallow waters near Cavite, the acrid smell of gunpowder mixed with burning wood and oil created a choking haze that drifted across the battlefield, as reported in contemporary dispatches to the New York Herald. Spanish crew of Reina Cristina showed remarkable courage. Despite their hopeless situation, they continued firing their obsolete cannons even as their ship took hit after hit, flames spreading through her rigging and superstructure. But courage alone could not overcome the massive disparity in firepower and technology. One by one, Spanish guns fell silent as their crews were killed or wounded, leaving their ships defenseless against continued American bombardment. The sound of battle echoed across Manila Bay like rolling thunder, reaching the ears of Philippine revolutionaries who watched from the shoreline with mounting excitement. They understood that Spanish colonial power was being systematically destroyed before their eyes, opening possibilities for independence that had seemed impossible just hours before. The future of the Philippines hung in the balance as American shells continued to rain down on the remnants of Spain's Pacific Fleet. By 7 in the morning, the outcome was no longer in doubt. The carnage intensified as the American squadron methodically destroyed every Spanish vessel in sight. Admiral Montoyo's fleet, once the pride of Spain's Pacific presence, was being reduced to smoking wreckage with surgical precision. The Spanish gunboat Ulloa attempted a desperate charge against the American line, her captain hoping that close-range fighting might even the odds. Instead, concentrated fire from 3 American warships turned her into a blazing hulk within minutes, her crew leaping into the bay to escape the flames consuming their ship. Spanish shore batteries at Cavite Arsenal joined the fight, their ancient cannons belching smoke and fury toward the American fleet. However, their obsolete artillery proved no match for modern naval gunnery. American ships maintained their distance, while systematically silencing each battery position, their shells finding ammunition stores and gun emplacements with deadly accuracy. Explosions rocked the Spanish fortifications as powder magazines detonated, sending columns of black smoke spiraling into the morning sky. The USS Baltimore and USS Boston concentrated their fire on the Spanish cruiser Castilla, the largest vessel in Montoyo's fleet after the burning Reina Cristina. Her wooden hull, despite desperate attempts at armoring, proved utterly inadequate against American intent shells. Great chunks of timber flew through the air as projectiles tore through her sides, exposing the ship's internal structure to further devastation. Spanish sailors fought bravely to save their vessel, forming bucket brigades to combat the spreading fires. But their efforts proved futile against the American onslaught. From the USS Olympia, Commodore Dewey observed the destruction with the calculating eye of a professional warrior. His battle plan was unfolding exactly as anticipated. American technological superiority and superior training were proving decisive against Spanish colonial forces. Each enemy ship that fell silent represented another nail in the coffin of Spanish imperial power in the Pacific. The United States was announcing its arrival as a global naval force in the most dramatic way possible, according to dispatches later published in the London Times. Spanish casualties were mounting at an alarming rate while American losses remained virtually non-existent. The technological gap between the two fleets had created a situation more resembling target practice than actual naval combat. Spanish shells that managed to reach American ships either bounced harmlessly off their steel hulls or caused only cosmetic damage to superstructures designed to withstand modern warfare. The Spanish gunboat General Lazo made a valiant attempt to ram the USS Petrel, her captain choosing death over surrender. However, American maneuverability proved superior, and the Petrel's guns spoke with devastating effect at point-blank range. The General Lazo's boilers exploded under direct hits, sending scalding steam and metal fragments across her deck. Her survivors, many badly burned, threw themselves into the bay rather than face the inferno consuming their ship. Spanish Admiral Montoya, wounded in seeing his fleet destroyed around him, transferred his flag from the sinking Reina Cristina to the transport ship Isla de Cuba. From this humble vessel, he watched helplessly as American guns completed the destruction of his command. The once proud Spanish Pacific Squadron was being systematically annihilated, ship by ship, gun by gun. 3 centuries of Spanish naval dominance in these waters was ending in a matter of hours. The psychological impact on Spanish forces became evident as white flags began appearing on damaged vessels. However, American fire continued unabated, was determined to achieve complete victory, leaving no possibility for Spanish recovery or reinforcement. The message being sent was clear. American naval power had arrived in the Pacific. It would not be challenged with impunity. As the morning progressed, the bay filled with debris from destroyed Spanish warships, fragments of masts, pieces of hull plating, personal belongings of dead sailors. The water itself seemed to burn as oil from ruptured fuel tanks spread across the surface, creating an apocalyptic scene of destruction that would be remembered for generations to come. By 8 o'clock in the morning, Spanish Pacific Squadron had ceased to exist as a fighting force. Every major warship lay either sinking or burning in the shallow waters near Cavite, their crews killed, wounded, or swimming desperately toward shore. The USS Olympia's guns had fallen silent, not from exhaustion, but because there were simply no more targets worth engaging. Commodore Dewey surveyed the scene of complete devastation with grim satisfaction. American naval power had been established in the Pacific through overwhelming force. The Spanish flagship Reina Cristina had disappeared beneath the surface, her proud colors still flying as she took her final plunge. Her captain, Luis Cadarso, had died at his post, becoming one of the few Spanish officers to achieve a measure of honor in this catastrophic defeat. The cruiser Castilla burned fiercely at her moorings, ammunition exploding periodically as fires reached her magazine spaces. Spanish sailors who had escaped the sinking ships huddled on the Cavite shoreline, watching their fleet's destruction with expressions of shock and disbelief. American casualties proved almost negligible: 8 men wounded, none killed. This extraordinary disparity highlighted the complete technological and tactical superiority of Dewey's squadron over Spanish colonial forces. The USS Olympia had suffered only minor damage to her superstructure, while other American vessels remained virtually untouched despite hours of combat. It was a victory so complete that it bordered on the miraculous, at least from an American perspective. Spanish shore installations had also been systematically destroyed. The Cavite Naval Arsenal, once the beating heart of Spanish naval operations in the Philippines, lay in ruins. Its dry docks had been shattered, its machine shops demolished, and its ammunition stores reduced to smoking craters. The infrastructure that had supported Spanish naval power for generations had been obliterated in a single morning's work, ensuring that no recovery would be possible. The psychological impact of this devastating defeat extended far beyond military considerations. Filipino revolutionaries, led by Emilio Aguinaldo, watched from the mainland with growing excitement as Spanish colonial authority collapsed before their eyes. the sight of American warships systematically destroying Spanish forces offered hope that independence might finally be within reach. Revolutionary leaders began making plans to coordinate with American forces, believing they had found powerful allies in their struggle against Spanish rule. From the deck of the transport Isla de Cuba, Admiral Montoyo began composing his report. To Madrid, knowing it would likely end his naval career, how could he explain losing an entire fleet without inflicting significant damage on the enemy? The magnitude of Spanish defeat would shock the imperial government and accelerate Spain's withdrawal from its remaining Pacific territories. The single battle had effectively ended 3 centuries of Spanish dominance in the western Pacific Ocean, as documented in contemporary cables sent to European newspapers. The Battle of Manila Bay represented a turning point in global naval affairs. The United States had announced its arrival as a major maritime power through the complete destruction of a European fleet. American industrial capacity, combined with modern naval doctrine and superior training, had proven devastatingly effective against traditional colonial forces. The implications would resonate throughout European capitals as other nations reassessed their own naval capabilities. Dewey ordered his squadron to anchor in the bay, establishing American control over Manila's harbor facilities. In the city found themselves completely isolated. Their naval protection eliminated and their communications with Madrid severed. The siege of Manila had begun, though few realized it at the time. American Marines would soon land to secure strategic positions, while Filipino revolutionaries tightened their grip on the countryside. The smoke from burning Spanish warships continued to rise into the afternoon sky, visible for miles across the Philippine archipelago. This pillar of smoke served as a signal to every Spanish garrison and civil administrator their empire in the Pacific was ending. An American power was rising to take its place. As the smoke cleared over Manila Bay, the magnitude of American victory became starkly apparent. 11 Spanish warships lay destroyed or disabled, their crews scattered and their fighting capability eliminated forever. The Spanish Pacific Squadron, built up over decades of colonial expansion, had been wiped from existence in approximately 6 hours of combat. Never before in naval history had such complete destruction been achieved with so few losses to the victor, a testament to the revolutionary changes occurring in naval warfare during the late 19th century. Commodore Dewey immediately set about consolidating his position. American Marines landed at Cavite Naval Arsenal, securing the facility and beginning the process of establishing a permanent American naval presence in Philippine waters. The captured Spanish installations would serve as the foundation for American Pacific operations, providing the infrastructure necessary to support future naval campaigns. Work crews began clearing debris and assessing what equipment could be salvaged from the devastated Spanish facilities. The reaction in Manila itself proved complex and revealing. Spanish civil authorities, led by Governor-General Basilio Agustin y Davila, found themselves in an impossible position. With their naval protection eliminated and communication lines to Madrid severed, they were effectively isolated in hostile territory. Filipino revolutionaries controlled most of the countryside, while American warships commanded the sea approaches to their capital. The colonial administration that had ruled these islands for over 3 centuries suddenly faced extinction. Filipino revolutionary leaders, particularly Emilio Aguinaldo, saw the American victory as divine providence. They had been fighting Spanish colonial rule for years with limited success, but now powerful allies had appeared to tip the balance decisively in their favor. Aguinaldo began coordinating with American forces, believing that independence was finally within reach. However, the seeds of future conflict were already present in this alliance. American and Filipino goals would prove fundamentally incompatible in the months to come. European reaction to the battle proved immediate and profound. According to reports published in Le Figaro and other major newspapers, complete destruction of a European fleet by American forces sent shockwaves through colonial capitals worldwide. The technological gap between American industrial might and traditional colonial forces had been demonstrated in the most dramatic fashion possible. Other European powers began reassessing their own naval capabilities and colonial defenses in light of this stunning demonstration of American power. Strategic implications extended far beyond the Philippines themselves. American control of Manila Bay provided the United States with a forward naval base in the Western Pacific, positioning American forces to influence events throughout East Asia. This development alarmed established powers like Britain and Germany, who suddenly found American warships operating in their traditional spheres of influence. The global balance of power was shifting, and the Battle of Manila Bay marked a crucial moment in this transformation. Back in the United States, news of Dewey's victory triggered massive celebrations. The American public, still grieving over the loss of the USS Maine in Havana Harbor, finally had a triumph to celebrate. Dewey became an instant national hero, his name emblazoned across newspaper headlines from coast to coast. The victory seemed to validate American industrial progress and military preparedness, demonstrating that the United States could compete with established European powers on equal terms. Spanish losses proved catastrophic beyond mere military considerations. Over 400 Spanish sailors had been killed or wounded, while material losses included not just the ships themselves, but irreplaceable experienced personnel. The Spanish Navy's ability to operate in Pacific waters had been eliminated in a single morning, forcing Madrid to reconsider its entire imperial strategy. The psychological impact on Spanish colonial administration proved equally devastating. If their fleet could be destroyed so easily, how could they hope to maintain control over distant territories? The battle also demonstrated the emerging importance of industrial capacity in modern warfare. American ships had been built in American yards using American steel and armed with American guns. This industrial independence allowed the United States to project power globally without relying on foreign suppliers or allies. European powers, particularly Britain, began to recognize that American industrial growth represented a fundamental challenge to their global dominance. The weeks following the Battle of Manila Bay witnessed a complete transformation in Pacific power dynamics. American warships patrolled Philippine waters with impunity, while Spanish colonial authority crumbled throughout the archipelago. Governor-General Agustin found himself trapped in Manila, surrounded by hostile forces and cut off from any hope of reinforcement or escape. The 3-century-old Spanish colonial system in the Philippines was collapsing like a house of cards, its foundations destroyed by American naval gunfire. Commodore Dewey established himself as the de facto ruler of Manila Bay, controlling all maritime traffic and communications. His squadron had been reinforced by additional vessels from the United States, creating an American naval presence that completely dominated the Western Pacific. The strategic implications were profound. American forces now controlled one of the most important harbors in Asia, positioning the United States to influence events throughout the region. This development alarmed established powers like Britain, Germany, and Japan, who suddenly found American competitors operating in their traditional spheres of influence. Filipino revolutionary forces, emboldened by the Spanish naval defeat, launched coordinated attacks on colonial positions throughout the archipelago. Spanish garrisons found themselves isolated, and under constant pressure from insurgent forces who now believed victory was inevitable. The psychological impact of seeing their naval protection destroyed had demoralized Spanish troops and administrators, many of whom began contemplating surrender rather than continuing a hopeless struggle. Revolutionary leader Emilio Aguinaldo proclaimed the independence of the Philippine Republic, though the reality of American control complicated his nationalist ambitions. The international response to American victory proved both congratulatory and concerned. European newspapers praised American naval efficiency while warning about the implications of rising American power in the Pacific. Germany, which had its own colonial interests in the region, began moving warships toward Philippine waters to monitor the situation. Britain, traditionally dominant in Asian waters, found itself forced to reassess its regional strategies in light of permanent American presence. The comfortable European assumption that Asia belonged to established colonial powers had been shattered by American industrial might. According to contemporary reports in the Times of London, the Battle of Manila Bay marked a fundamental shift in global naval affairs. The complete destruction of a European fleet by American forces demonstrated that the United States had achieved technological and tactical parity with traditional maritime powers. This development forced a reassessment of American capabilities throughout European capitals, where military planners began studying the battle for lessons about modern naval warfare. The age of unchallenged European naval supremacy was clearly ending. American public opinion was crystallized around support for territorial expansion following Dewey's victory. The acquisition of overseas territories suddenly seemed both feasible and necessary to protect American interests in the Pacific. Politicians like Theodore Roosevelt argued that American security required permanent bases in Philippine waters, while business leaders saw opportunities for expanded trade with Asian markets. The isolationist sentiment that had dominated American foreign policy since independence was giving way to imperial ambitions, justified by military success. Spanish authorities in Madrid faced a complete strategic collapse in the Pacific theater. With their fleet destroyed and their colonial administration under siege, they had no realistic hope of maintaining control over the Philippines. Peace negotiations with the United States became inevitable, though Spanish pride demanded they extract whatever concessions possible from their humiliating defeat. The Treaty of Paris, signed later that year, would formally transfer Spanish territories to American control. Ratifying the military reality established at Manila Bay, the battle's impact on naval doctrine proved equally significant. Military theorists worldwide studied Dewey's tactics, analyzing how modern steel warships with long-range artillery could achieve decisive victories. Against traditional colonial forces, the engagement demonstrated the importance of technological superiority, professional training, and industrial capacity in determining naval outcomes. European naval academies began revising their curricula to incorporate lessons learned from American success in Philippine waters. Filipino expectations of independence, however, would soon clash with American imperial ambitions, setting the stage for another conflict that would define the early years of American Pacific Empire, the Battle of Manila. Bay established the United States as a legitimate Pacific power overnight, fundamentally altering the global balance of maritime strength. Commodore George Dewey's tactical brilliance and the technological superiority of American warships had achieved what many considered impossible: the complete annihilation of a European fleet with virtually no losses to the victor. This stunning demonstration of American naval capability sent shockwaves through established colonial powers, who suddenly realized they faced a formidable new competitor in the Pacific theater. The strategic consequences extended far beyond the immediate military victory. American control of Manila Bay provided the United States with its first major overseas naval base, establishing the infrastructure necessary for sustained Pacific operations. This forward position allowed American forces to project power throughout Southeast Asia and the Western Pacific, fundamentally changing regional power dynamics. European colonial administrators from Hong Kong to Singapore found themselves operating under the watchful gaze of American warships, their traditional monopoly on regional influence permanently shattered. The human cost of Spanish defeat proved devastating to imperial morale throughout their remaining territories. Over 400 Spanish sailors had died in the battle, while American casualties numbered only 8 wounded men. This extraordinary disparity highlighted the complete technological gap between American industrial might and Spanish colonial forces. The psychological impact on Spanish military personnel worldwide proved profound. If their Pacific squadron could be destroyed so easily, what hope did other colonial forces have against American power? Filipino revolutionaries initially celebrated the American victory as the key to their independence struggle, but these hopes would soon prove tragically misplaced. The United States had no intention of granting Philippine independence, instead viewing the islands as valuable strategic territory essential for American Pacific interests. This fundamental misunderstanding would lead to the Philippine-American War, a brutal conflict that cost far more lives than the Spanish-American War itself. The seeds of this future tragedy were already present in the moment of American triumph at Manila Bay. International reaction to the battle established new patterns of global diplomacy that that would define the early 20th century. European powers were forced to acknowledge American equality in naval affairs, leading to complex alliance systems designed to contain or accommodate rising American influence. Germany's decision to send warships to Philippine waters immediately after the battle demonstrated European concern about American expansion, while Britain's eventual accommodation with American power reflected realistic assessment of changing global dynamics. The technological lessons learned from the battle revolutionized naval warfare worldwide. The effectiveness of long-range artillery against wooden-hulled vessels convinced naval architects to abandon traditional ship designs in favor of all-steel construction. The importance of professional training and industrial capacity in determining battle outcomes became accepted doctrine in naval academies globally. European powers began massive naval building programs designed to match American technological capabilities, contributing to the naval arms race that would culminate in World War I. American public opinion was transformed by news of Dewey's victory, with isolationist sentiment giving way to enthusiastic support for overseas expansion. The complete destruction of Spanish naval power seemed to validate American industrial progress and military preparedness, convincing many citizens that their nation was destined for global leadership. Politicians capitalized on this nationalist fervor to justify territorial acquisitions that would have been unthinkable just months before the battle, as reported in contemporary accounts from major American newspapers. The Battle of Manila Bay represented the emergence of the United States as a world power in the truest sense. The nation that had been focused primarily on continental expansion suddenly found itself controlling territories thousands of miles from its shores, with the naval capacity to defend these far-flung possessions against any challenger. This transformation from regional to global power occurred literally overnight, achieved through 6 hours of devastating naval gunfire in a bay halfway around the world from American shores. The legacy of May 1st, 1898 would resonate through American foreign policy for generations to come. The decisive victory at Manila Bay established patterns of American Manila Pacific involvement that would define the 20th century, from World War II battles at Midway and Latte Gulf to modern naval operations throughout the region. Commodore Dewey's perfect victory had announced America's arrival as a Pacific power in terms that no rival could ignore or forget, forever changing the course of global history through the systematic destruction of Spanish naval power in Philippine waters.